Section 7 of the Odyssey, Ghosts and Monsters. Odysseus spent most of the night listening to Circe's instructions. At dawn the next morning, he woke his men and ordered them to get ready for the voyage. Hastily, they left Circe's house and headed down to the shore to prepare their ship, all except Elpenor. He had drunk too much wine the night before. Then, because he was hot, he climbed onto the roof of Circe's palace and fallen asleep there. When he heard Odysseus calling the sailors together, he woke up suddenly. Forgetting where he was, he jumped to his feet and fell off the roof. His neck broke and he died instantly. None of the others noticed what had happened. They were all listening in amazement to what Odysseus was saying. "We cannot sail for Ithaca yet," he told them. "First, we have to go to the land of the dead to ask advice from the prophet Tiresias." The sailors were afraid, but they obeyed his orders. As they pushed their ship out into the water, Circe came down to the shore with a ram and a black ewe. "Remember," she said to Odysseus, "you must sail until you find a grove of poplars and long-leaved willow trees. When you see that, you must walk inland and sacrifice these animals where the two rivers meet, as I told you." She drove the sheep on board and then lifted her staff and waved it in the air, calling up the north wind they needed. All day they sailed across the wine-dark sea. As night fell, they reached a wild coast and saw a single grove of poplars and willows, exactly as Circe had foretold. Pulling their ship onto the beach, they walked inland, driving the sheep ahead of them. Soon they saw a steep, rocky pinnacle looming up in the darkness. That marked the place where the river of flaming fire joined the river of lamentation. Together they flowed into the great black Acheron that ran through the land of the dead. "This is where we must sacrifice the sheep," Odysseus said. "When they smell the blood, the souls of the dead will rise up to meet us, and we will ask them to bring Tiresias." Following Circe's instructions, he poured honey and milk into a trench, adding wine and water and grains of barley. Then he sacrificed the sheep and drew his sword. The souls of the dead came fluttering up from the underworld with hollow, eerie cries. Thousands of them flocked around Odysseus as he stood shivering on the edge of the trench. The ghosts of young men and girls floated next to the battle-scarred warriors. Old men with gray hair brushed against newly married brides. They jostled together, vying for Odysseus's attention. He scanned their insubstantial faces, and suddenly he recognized one. "Elpenor, how can you be here, among the dead?" "I fell from the roof and broke my neck," Elpenor said mournfully. "My body is lying behind Circe's palace. Please go back and give me a proper funeral." "I will," promised Odysseus, "but first I must speak to the prophet Tiresias." "There he is," Elpenor said, "coming toward us now." Odysseus turned and saw the shade of the old blind prophet rising through the darkness. He stepped forward respectfully, waiting for Tiresias to speak. "Noble Odysseus," said Tiresias, "I know your heart's desire is to return to Ithaca, but you have angered Poseidon. Because you blinded the Cyclops, his son, he will make your journey as difficult as he can." "Are you saying we shall never reach home?" Odysseus cried. "There is a chance for you all," Tiresias said, "but only if you keep your men under control. When you reach the island of Thrinacia, don't let your men touch the sun god's cattle. If they hurt those cattle, your ship will be lost, and all your sailors too." "What about me?" said Odysseus. "You may survive, but if you do, I prophesy that it will be many years before you reach Ithaca, and when you do, you will enter your house in rags and find it full of trouble." "Will Poseidon be satisfied with that?" Odysseus asked. Tiresias shook his great head sadly. "If you want to be free of Poseidon's curse, you must make another journey. Travel inland with an oar over your shoulder until you are far away from the sea. When someone mistakes your oar for a winnowing fan, sacrifice to Poseidon there. Then he will let you live in peace again." Bowing his head, Tiresias drifted back into the underworld. Then all the other shades swirled around Odysseus in a cloud of familiar and unfamiliar faces, chanting their stories to him. But the spirits of the dead cannot stay long in the world of the living. One by one they dwindled away, until Odysseus and his men were on their own beside the thundering rivers. With heavy hearts, they returned to their ship and let the wind carry them back to Circe's island. There at dawn they built a funeral pyre for their friend Elpenor and cremated him, with all his weapons. When his ashes were cold, they built a mound on the seashore so that his name would never be forgotten. After the funeral, Circe and her handmaidens came down to the shore, carrying bread and meat and sparkling red wine. "You are heroes," Circe said. "You've been to the land of the dead and back again. Spend the rest of the day here, feasting with me, and I will tell you about all the dangers ahead, so that you are ready to face them when you sail tomorrow." All day they feasted until sunset. As night began to fall, the sailors settled down to sleep beside the ship. Then Circe took Odysseus by the hand and led him to a place where they could talk privately. "You are going to sail into many dangers," she said. "First, you will come to the Sirens, whose song drives men mad with longing. If you succeed in passing them, you will reach the Wandering Rocks. They wreck every ship that approaches. You must avoid them, but you can only do that by facing a terrible choice. Listen carefully to everything I tell you, Odysseus." Far into the night they sat together, and Circe talked on and on, warning Odysseus about what lay ahead. In the morning, Odysseus woke his men and ordered them into the ship. Circe gave them a favorable wind, and they set sail immediately. When they were safely out at sea, Odysseus told them the first of Circe's warnings. "A great danger lies ahead of us," he said. "Soon we shall come to a place where the Sirens sing. Everyone who hears them wants to go on listening forever. Unless you close your ears to the sound, you will never reach home, never see your wives and children again." He lifted a ball of beeswax that Circe had given him, working it in his fingers as he spoke. "I shall block your ears with this to protect you, but not my own. I am determined to hear the Sirens sing, and Circe has told me the only way to do that safely. When I have filled your ears with wax, you must tie me to the mast. Knot the ropes tightly so that I can't move, and if I beg you to let me go, just pull them even tighter." As he spoke, the wind dropped, and the ship came to a standstill. The sailors looked at one another. They would never get past the Sirens unless they kept rowing. Odysseus went around the ship, plugging their ears with wax. When he had finished, the sailors fetched ropes and lashed him to the mast so tightly that he couldn't move hand or foot. Then they took up their oars and began to row as hard as they could. Very soon they drew up to a flowery meadow that ran beside the seashore. That was where the Sirens sat, surrounded by the skeletons of all those who had stayed to listen to their song. As soon as they saw Odysseus's ship, they began to sing again, turning their heads so that the sound floated out over the water. "Come here to us and stop your restless journey," they sang. "Come here and listen to the sound of wisdom, to all the gathered knowledge of the world, distilled into the music of our song. Come here to us, come here to us, come here to us." That was the song Odysseus heard. It filled him with such longing that he shouted to his men to put down their oars and untie him. When they did not answer, because they couldn't hear, he screamed and ranted, rolling his eyes and making anguished faces. "Undo the ropes!" he shrieked. "Everything I said before was nonsense. Everything is nonsense, except the siren song. Stop rowing. Let me go to them." If he'd been free, he would have jumped overboard and swum to the shore, but he couldn't move, and the sailors obeyed the instructions he'd given them. Two men jumped up and tightened the cords that held him to the mast. The others kept rowing, pulling with all their strength. Some of them were tempted to stop and unblock their ears. They had been away from home for more than 10 years now, and Ithaca seemed very far away. But they were faithful to Odysseus's orders, closing their eyes to shut out the sight of his desperate, yearning face. They leaned into their oars and pulled and pulled and pulled.